order to make that person feel bad, but the impact was that they did. So how do you rectify that? How do you talk to them in real, authentic ways? It says, I'm learning, I'm so sorry I did that, I didn't realize, and it's not on you to educate me about why I did that, but I'm going to go and do my own work. I'm going to continually educate myself about that. And when Camille and I were writing the book, there was so many different things that for her as a Black woman, she has to show her transcript to people. She was an associate dean. I've never had to show my transcript since I was, my first job. Nobody's asking for it. But as a Black woman, she's been asked to show her transcript from back in the 1990s, like 1992. So, and I was like, they're still asking you for that? She's like, oh yeah. So there's things that I had blind spots to that I didn't even realize that she was experiencing. And so now that I know that, I can understand the extra burdens and the extra things that are happening to her that I don't experience. So know the collective people, know the collective history of the people and space around you. Understand colonialism. In the Pacific Northwest, we have a lot of different tribes. And the tribes don't trust white university professors to come down because what's happened is the university professors have taken all the data that they need, they go and publish it, and they go become big names off of the backs of these people that have been colonized. And so they don't trust, and there's a reason for that, there's a good reason for that. So knowing that collective history, understanding that. Understanding sex discrimination based on language, segregation, systemic oppression. There's so many different layers of ways in which people have been marginalized, and those voices have not been heard, and their voices have not been honored in the creation of our society. And so how do we start to really identify that and look it right in its face and say, you know what, I'm going to be the one that's changing this. I'm going to be the one that's going to transform this so that I don't have to have anybody else behind me experience this. And then understand your and other people's positions of power. So I told you about as a professor, I talk to my students about that, about, hey, you know what, I know that I'm in charge of your grades. I recognize that. I'm recognizing the power that I have over you right now. And I want you to know that we're going to collaborate and we're going to talk about it. Right now, they're doing something online. Today is what, Thursday? I'm teaching a culture, equity, and advocacy class at 5 o'clock Pacific time. They are actually watching a film and they're facilitating their own discussion in class without me. And they're just going to take a selfie of all of them in there. And then they're going to turn in a little summary of what they talked about. And I'm trusting them to do that. And if they don't, that's on them. They're college students. So what does solidarity look like? Mentor a woman different than you. So Sharon talked about that idea of mentoring earlier. Collaborate on specific objectives. So know that you want to strategize as much as possible. And when you meet together, how do you actually strategize together to figure out what are we going to do? What do we want to see? How do we build our infrastructure so that we actually can come together in strategic ways? Notice your and other space bubbles. So notice when you are the one how many of you are kind of the talker in the room that sometimes you might take up a lot of space? I am. Come on, you know who you are. How many of you are those that are like, don't really talk that much, don't want to say too much, don't want to fill up the space, don't want to overtalk? Okay, we all know who you are, and I can see that. Notice when you can step forward and when you should step back. And also notice when somebody else is in a meeting, and let's say another woman gets interrupted, say, oh, and maybe a guy interrupts and says, oh, actually, or they co-opt the idea, go bring it back to the woman that first said it, and give her that microphone again and say, hey, wait a minute, I think, let's go back to, what Alicia was saying, because I think she had a great point there. So, standing up for each other in these meetings. So stand up in the meetings, and if you see something like that whole idea of the dramatic thing, you might not have the language at the moment, or you might be so shocked by what was said you weren't able to say anything in that moment, but that's okay. You can always go back and readdress it. Because this happened in the fall, and then the guy called us dramatic, and this whole year long was happening. And by the springtime when we had that talk, and he called us dramatic. And so I had tried to reach out to the guys all during that year, and they didn't want to meet up, because I think they knew what we were going to say. So interrupt racist and sexist language immediately. As soon as you hear it, say something. It's like when the airport, what did they say? Oh, Karen came in. What did they say in the airport? Karen, like if you see something, yes, if you see something, say something. So the thing is, if we're going to have solidarity, we have to stand up for each other. We have to do it together. We cannot be siloed. We cannot be away from each other. We have to do this together. Create employee resource groups. How many of you are in some ERGs? Okay, so if you don't have an affinity group or an ERG, an employee resource group, create one for women. Do what we're doing right here. This is exactly what you would do in an ERG. So create those employee resource groups. If you want to do it for Latino women, do it for Latino women. If you want to do it for gay women, do it for gay women. If you want to do it for black women, do it for black women. Do not be ashamed of creating a group that is specifically addressing your needs. Because you can do that, and they are legally supposed to help you do that.